Hi everyone. I thought I'd cover today one of the aspects that I was perhaps a little light on the detail of in the article I wrote this weekend on the perfect home media server. And that was the actual installation of the software. So I spent an awfully long time putting this article together, probably about two days almost solidly. And it was a lot longer than I actually meant to spend writing this article. I decided that once I got started, I may as well do it properly and do diagrams and all sorts of other stuff like that. So explain Docker, So by the time I actually got to the point of explaining the installation with Debian and Ansible and things like that, I didn't really have an awful lot of space left before the article would have gone around the earth and started again. So I figured I'd put together a video instead to actually cover the setup and installation of the server using Ansible. So I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks that I use to actually automate my Ansible workflow using a program called Vagrant to act as an abstraction layer between my commands and VirtualBox so that I can iterate on my development of my playbooks without actually touching my live server, so that when I know that my playbook is complete and ready to go, I'm not going to screw anything up. That can happen if you get it wrong, because it's just the same as running a bash script over something. It's going to do what it's told. So by putting Vagrant in between, what it means is that I can test on my local laptop before I push the changes to Git and then make sure that everything is exactly as it should be. So when I want to install my server, I simply run this one command here: ansible-playbook epsilon.yaml-i hosts-K. That might seem like a little bit of dark magic, and it is a bit, I suppose. However, what it does is it means that I can know every time I run this command what's going to happen. That's based off of the contents of my playbooks. So as I say here, this single command executes a playbook. A playbook contains a series of tasks grouped together under roles. This promotes reuse of these roles across multiple systems. So if I wanted to install Docker on 5 machines, all I would need to do for each of those machines is include the Docker role. Same goes for mergerfs, same goes for snapraid. And then this role here, epsilon, this is the one that is specific to my media server. Now, in all the Ansible documentation you'll find on the web, it refers to sort of web servers and more standardized deployment tools where Ansible's probably used more often in all likelihood. When you've got 50 web servers to deploy, the last thing you're going to want to do is have to do that 50 times manually. So hence a tool like Ansible was born. Okie doke. So it's probably worth just mentioning quickly where you can find some really good documentation on Ansible. So docs.ansible.com is a really good site, and it'll take you through everything you need to know, to be honest. It is quite detailed. I will warn you now, it is quite detailed. And Ansible works on the concept of modules. So rather than Ansible itself directly interacting with your system, you have a bunch of modules which interact directly with your system. So I'm going to look at the files modules here. If I wanted to, copy some files to remote locations, this is quite common. You want to copy a file from your Ansible control box, in my case my laptop, to my server. I'm going to want to use the copy module. Now there is a whole bunch of parameters per module. In this one, they're called options. Sorry, not parameters. Oh no, they are called parameters. Look at that. Options and parameters. That's confusing. So under the options, you have a whole bunch of parameters. And they tell you exactly what they do here. And then if you scroll a little bit further down, you get a bunch of examples. This is a bit more advanced than I want to go into for this this little video, but you can have return values. It's very useful if you want to make sure that, do some checksumming, make sure once a file's been copied, that the file that is actually being copied is the exact file that you had. So you can checksum it and use an MD5 if you like to make sure that that's happened. Quite useful. Bit beyond what I'm going to cover for this this video though. So, all right, I have, I want to copy across serve/myfile/foo and stick it in etc foo.conf. I want to select the owner of the file, the group, and then the mode. So this is using standard POSIX permissions. There's a whole bunch of other examples down below. Okay, hopefully that's got your head roughly around the concept of a module. Let's look at some code, shall we? Time to move on to the Vagrant file. So what we've got here is a file which defines how Vagrant is going to deploy this particular virtual machine. It's a manifest. It's going to use the box file Debian/Jessie64. It's going to use the if and when the provider VirtualBox is provided, it's going to give it the name epsilon.dev, 2 gigs of RAM, 2 CPUs, and then finally it's going to use the Ansible provisioning agent to run the Ansible.playbook main.yaml, which looks like this. Main.yaml at the moment has MergerFS and SnapRaid commented out, but what it does is it says run on all hosts, run as sudo, and then execute the roles docker and epsilon. Okay, so what the docker role does is it installs docker, The MergerFS role does the same for MergerFS and SnapRaid. These are both, by the way, MergerFS and SnapRaid, they're both built in Docker containers from source. I've written a post about that on the blog. And then finally, the role epsilon. Now, this is the role which finally configures all of the applications. So think of these 3 roles as the installation roles, and this role here is the configuration role. Okay. Now, back to the Vagrant file. What is this? Where does this come from? Debian/Jessie64. Well, HashiCorp, who is the company behind Vagrant, actually have a whole bunch of images stored on Atlas. So if we go to atlas.hashicorp.com and go and have a look at Debian/Jessie64, we can see that there are a couple of providers available. You've got the LXC provider and the VirtualBox provider. Same for Ubuntu, so vanilla Debian base boxes. Same for Ubuntu, there's vanilla boxes here. Official builds. So you got Ubuntu/Wiley64. So how do we actually use that? How do we make this file here actually useful? Well, we go to our command line. We make sure that we're actually in the same directory as where the Ansible is stored. So we're in the Ansible folder here. And then we have a look, and we've got a Vagrant file, so let's just check that's the right one. Vagrant, epsilon, yep. Okay, all good. So what we'll do now is we'll do a Vagrant box add Debian/Jessie64. And what this will do is it will go to Atlas, the website we just looked at, owned by HashiCorp. And I'm going to choose the provider, VirtualBox, and it will attempt to download it. Now, I already have Debian/Jessie64 downloaded, but if you wanted to do another one, recall we saw on here that you had Ubuntu/Wiley64. So let's try that. Vagrant box add Ubuntu/Wiley64. Voila. Look at that. It's downloading automatically from Atlas. It's going to take about 5 minutes on my line, maybe less. It doesn't matter. I don't want it anyway. So I'm going to cancel that and clear it. I was just showing you guys what the Vagrant box add should do. All right, so let's do Vagrant up now. Now what Vagrant up is going to do is it's going to go through a whole bunch of steps. First, it's going to import the Debian/Jessie64 image and perform a whole bunch of Vagranty goodness where it sets up SSH keys for us. It creates default users. It waits for the machines to boot. It sets up network interfaces, and it abstracts away it abstracts away an awful lot of the complexity that might normally be associated with interacting with a virtual machine on your system. You don't have to know the IP address of the machine. You don't have to know the network stack that it's using, the interface. You don't have to understand anything. You just simply run Vagrant up and you have a machine almost instantly. So we've moved now into the Ansible phase of the provisioning. Now, using the config.provision section of our Vagrant file, Vagrant's picked up the fact that we wanted to run an Ansible playbook. And you know that we're in Ansible mode when you start seeing stars everywhere. So it's probably a good time to talk about how Ansible handles state. Ansible's role in life is to bring a box from the state it's at before you execute the playbook up to the state prescribed in the playbook. So how it measures whether it's been successful or not is based on the state of a file or the state of a package, whether it's installed, something like that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So what we're doing at the moment is we're bringing the virtual machine up to the prescribed state from my Ansible playbooks. You can see here actually the role which is currently executing. So at the moment we're in the Docker role here. These tasks here, they're in the Docker role. Okay, so that corresponds with this part here and this folder here. I'll go into that in detail in a moment. Then once the Docker role is complete, it moves on to the Epsilon role, where it starts to configure the base OS, install packages, set up the mount points for my drives, put those drives into the etcfs tab file, and then it starts installing things like Samba and NFS and all sorts of other stuff that I'm going to need to actually turn my server into a NAS type device. I haven't had to do anything. I haven't really had to lift a finger at this point. All I've done is type Vagrant up and waited and talked a bit. And hopefully, in a minute, there we are, it's done. Let's check that out, shall we? So if we do Vagrant SSH now, we're able to SSH into the virtual machine. You can see that here, Vagrant at Debbie and Jesse. Now, we've installed Docker, so let's go and take a look at that. Perfect, Docker version 1.10. Let's do a little test. Sudo docker.run interactive remove when I'm done of hello world. I don't know if this is going to work. Nothing like flying by the seat of your pants. Ah, wonderful. It did. Hello from Docker. Oh, wonderful. Look at that. So Docker's now installed on our server. We can assume that for the purposes of this demo that SnapRaid and MergerFS now are also installed, built in Docker, hence why Docker was installed first. And as such, none of the build dependencies from compiling those applications for source have had to be installed on my host either. Keeps things nice and clean. What else happened? Oh, we went and created a whole bunch of mount points in the /mount directory. So I've got the 5 data drives here. Then my parity drive. If we did a cat of etcfs tab, you can see that we've actually got all of those entries in the fs tab file automatically. What else did the role do? Let's go and take a look, shall we? Epsilon tasks. Okie dokie. So every Ansible playbook, every Ansible role starts with a main.yaml file. So first of all, it configured the base OS. Now what does that look like? That looks like this. We ensure that the OS is up to date. Now that's the equivalent of doing apt-get update and then apt-get upgrade. Yeah? Now we've all done that millions of times, I'm sure. And in Ansible, it uses the apt module. There's another module for yum if that's your package manager. And then here, we're actually going to iterate over an array of values. So we're going to use apt to install the package item state present with, so see here we've got the state. So we want the state of this list of packages to be present. So I use a whole bunch of stuff like sudo tree xfs progs YouTube download. That is amazing, by the way. If you've never used that, it's awesome. iotop, htop, git, views. So it just makes sure that everything I'm going to need for my system the way I like it is recorded as code. So if ever I was to add a package, for example, I don't know, PowerTop, I put that in there, I save it, and now if I go back to my system, I want to install that package next time, I do a Vagrant provision. Not Vagrant up, Vagrant provision. And just watch what happens. It's going to take a minute or two to run. But instead of every time we run, you see up here we've got changed. Everything is changed. So the state of the host was different from what Ansible had been told it should be. Whereas now, when we run it, we see, look, we've got lots and lots of green, except for the packages, because I added PowerTop. So we'll wait for the playbook to finish. I think this is the best thing about Ansible. So when you run a bash script, it runs every task, every time, no matter what, unless you put some complex logic in there. Ansible takes care of all that for us. So I'm going to use Vagrant SSH again. SSH into the virtual machine. And have a look at PowerTop. It needs to be sudo. Bingo. There we are. You see, so now we've got PowerTop installed just by making that one change in my file here and then running the playbook again. So there's a whole bunch of modules that I've used in this file. One, we've got apt, and then we've got file, and then we've got mount. This one's quite a complex job, quite a complex task. So I'll explain it a little bit. So here, I wanted to add into my FS tab, so that's this file. Let's just clear the screen for a second. I wanted to add into my FS tab all of the drives that were going to be mounted. Okay, so we've got disk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, parity drive, and then finally we've got the merger FS array itself. By using the with items again, what we can actually do is create, I don't know what really to call them. They're kind of like variables that you can reference. So if we have a look at the mount command, the name is item.name. So item, similarly to when we had the package option up here, item refers to each item in turn. Okay. So here, this refers to each item in turn, and then it's like a key value pair. Yeah, I suppose that's more accurate. It's a key value pair. So you have the item.name, which in the first instance is going to equal mount parity 1, because that's the first one in the list. So let's go and take a look at the FS tab file in Vagrant. Lo and behold, look at that. The first one that isn't part of the OS install is mount parity 1. Perfect. Then what we're able to do is reference the source as being item.source. So you've got the key and then the value over here being the disk by ID option. And then again, you have a state. So what I like to do is just set the state to present. That way it doesn't try and automatically mount the drive. However, if you're feeling brave, you can change that state to mounted. And what that will do is, as part of the Ansible playbook run, it will automatically mount your drives. I just like to go in and double check everything just in case. But we then do this. We then use mount again to actually mount the merger FS array, creating the entry in the FS tab file that we needed. Okay, so that's the base OS. We do a very similar thing for configuring network file sharing. Things like Samba. Notify is important because what Notify does is it calls what's called a handler. So when you install Samba, normally you'd go to apt. Let's just show you the manual steps. Normally you do apt-get install Samba. It's already installed, of course. Yeah, let's remove it. So yeah, what you'd do is you'd go apt-get install Samba. Apt would go through the process. Then you'd make sure that the Samba service was started. So what we do is we use a handler to do that. By notifying, does this make sense? By notifying start Samba service over here, it's able to restart the Samba daemon. Yeah, does the same for Docker, does the same for all sorts of stuff. Like NFS needs export FS running after every change you make to NFS. That can be automated. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That gives you quite a good overview as to how things work. I hope. The other thing worth noting is that I store all of my configuration files in the files directory. So under files, user bin, for example, I've got some tools that I use. Detail being one of them. What detail does is it looks at a running container. So instead of having to type docker logs -f container, what I can actually do is just type detail container. And then this has the added advantage of tailing that output at 50 lines. Quite a nice little tool that a friend of mine, Lonix, wrote. So under this files thing here, I have all the configuration files for my entire server. So my SnapRaid configuration lives here. My Etsy exports file lives here. My samba.conf file lives here. Everything. So I know when I want to make a change to anything, I just do it here. So let's do Samba, for example. Let's add a new share. New share. Comment. New share. Path equals new share. Read only equals yes. Let's do browsable as well. I don't actually know if this is going to work, but I've made the change to the file. I've now saved it. I've exited a virtual machine, and I'm just going to run Vagrant Provision once more. Now you should notice when it installs Samba that something has changed, and that will be in the config file area of the playbook. What it won't do is it won't reinstall Samba because that is already installed. But it will update the configuration file with the changes that I made. Took a little while to get going there, but I think we're away. Sorry about my throat. I've had a bit of an infection the last few days. There we go. I'm actually going to quit that just there so we can see. Task install updated Samba config. Let's do a Vagrant SSH and then do a test palm. Boom. Look at that. New share. Comment new share, path equals new share. That is exactly what we specified up here in the config file. Now if I go ahead and remove that share and run Vagrant Provision once more, hopefully you're going to get the idea of what's going to happen next. It's going to push those changes to my VM to bring my VM up to the state prescribed in the playbook. Now it's worth noting that Vagrant Provision is acting upon a virtual machine that we've now run playbooks over 3 or 4 times. Sometimes that can create problems because you end up with fragments left of files. Let's say you forgot to actually delete something Let's do Vagrant SSH now that's finished. Test Palm. And there we are. New share is gone. Perfect. Excuse me. Yeah, so what we might want to do at this point is do a Vagrant destroy. Now that sounds a bit destructive because that deletes the virtual machine. And then finally, once we're ready to deploy our changes one more time, we'll do a Vagrant up and run the whole process from scratch. So that really is it. That is my whistle-stop tour of installing Ansible. It's a bit longer. The video is a bit longer than I intended, but I've shown you quite a lot. Please, if you like the video, leave a comment down below. Comment on the article, something. Just let me know. I put a lot of time into this stuff, so hopefully it helps someone. All right, thanks guys. Bye.